final frontier.
Hello and welcome to Nerds of the Old Republic, the podcast where we drink and discuss nerdy fiction, and we ignore our feelings about the Buffalo Bills' disappointing loss by comfort watching 90s Star Trek episodes. I'm sorry. I'm Adam.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Mike.
Speaking of avoiding feelings and self-soothing with things, we're doing something a little different tonight. We're revisiting Star Trek: The Next Generation. If you follow us on social, you'll know that we watched The Best of Both Worlds, Part 1 and 2, which is Season 3, Episodes 26, and Season 4, Episode 1, Cliffhanger Ending, motherfucker. The Measure of a Man, Season 2, Episode 9. Yesterday's Enterprise, Season 3, Episode 15. Chain of Command, Season 6, Episodes 10 and 11. Inner Light, Season 5, Episode 25. And Deja Q, Season 3, Episode 13.
Got all that?
Yeah, I know. I'll tell you what, I watched the fuck out of my free Paramount Plus week. That's for sure. Suck it, Paramount. Anyways, sorry, please don't cease and desist us. So as a part of revisiting our OG sci-fi classic, we watched all those. But our conversation won't be limited to just those episodes. So have no fear if you didn't start your free trial like I did of Paramount Plus, just to rewatch. But first, if you want to help out this little endeavor of ours, consider following us on YouTube. We're trying something different on our socials, and we're looking for a new home. Now that Twitter has become the hell space Elon Musk hoped it would be. You can find us by searching for Nerds of Old Republic or clicking the link in the show notes. We're still going to be on Twitter, but we're going to get a little space.
We got till June, till Trump comes back. Rumor has it. Start making your plans now, guys.
We are opening with so much depressing shit today.
You know what? Because it's all uphill from here.
Damn.
Folks, you don't even know how great my basement
Go
smells
Sabres.
right now. Go Sabres, that's right. Do you want more 90s nostalgia goodness in your life? Check out our next cast, where we each pick our favorite sci-fi TV shows from what is the dawn of my life. That's right. I just outed myself. Hit us up on any social media, despite what I just said. Or you could just old-fashioned email. That's a thing. We are nerdsofoldrepublic@gmail.com/Sean. No, I'm just kidding.
Whoa. Well, I was going to just tell people they can send their Pepsi points to P.O. Box.
Pepsi points!
Yes.
Oh, I remember Pepsi points. This is going to be a nostalgia-filled month for us.
I did try to bring Crystal Pepsi for our little spread tonight, but I don't think I make it anymore.
I found Crystal Pepsi back in like the early 2000s, and I looked at it and I was like, is there dust on it? Like,
even then, that was late.
That's like
crazy.
That's like when you go to an antique place and they're like, I've got this 1970 Coca-Cola, and you're like, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure, I'm not going to buy that for $97 or whatever.
As a backup, I brought some Jolt.
Yes!
Was a Mountain Dew Red Alert.
And some Snapple. And we're going to mix it all together in a big bucket.
Oh, 90s juice.
For those of you who live in the greater Buffalo area, that's right, I'm calling it the GBA. There is a laser tag place that used to have the Lasertron Special, which is essentially just everything from the soda fountain mixed into one cup. And that's what I think of when I think of 90s drinks.
My kids are at that phase where they do that, where they get like one of those fountains where you can pour your own. They're like, oh, try this combination. I'm like, that's just disgusting.
It's pretty nasty.
You know what, though? I see that because it's the Coca-Cola dispensers. It's got like 191 choices or whatever. And I'm like, challenge accepted. Let's go.
Isn't that how Dr. Pepper was made?
Yeah, it was. So really, Dr. Pepper is like a third of that challenge. So you guys don't know this yet. I kind of intentionally hid the drink for today. But in Season 5, Episode 14, named Conundrum, everyone's memory is wiped, and Data thinks he's a bartender. After playing Troy in 3D chess, he makes her this drink that we're about to have.
No shit.
Yes.
I thought you were going to pull out the Romulan ale there.
I actually had a recipe for Romulan ale, but it's basically a gin fizz with a egg white float on top, and that's fucking disgusting. I'm sorry.
That's gross.
No. But the only thing I can't do is make it turn from clear to green to red. That's the only thing I can't do. Everything else is the same.
All right.
Fuck!
I know. I know. We tried. I searched liquor.com. I called many different chemical places, and they're like, well, if you want to die. I was like, well...
What are you willing to do for the cast, Adam? I mean...
Well, yeah, I thought about it. All right, so this is officially called a Sumerian sunset.
Ooh.
I'm going to need about 4 minutes to mix it up, so we'll catch everyone on the other slide.
Just keep it rolling, Mike, and I'll just...
All right, keep it rolling.
I'm kidding.
All right, we are back with our Sumerian sunset, which, because I don't have computer-generated graphics that just happen over the top of our drinks, it's essentially a lot of rum, lemon juice, lime juice, grapefruit, and sparkling water, simple syrup.
Very pungent bouquet at first, but then the second sniff, it like settles down.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
I'd agree with that.
All right. Well, cheers, gents.
Yeah, cheers.
Cheers. What did the Klingons say? Fuck.
Yummy.
Kerpla.
Kapla. Kapla. It's a good day to drink.
Yeah.
This would be a good beach drink.
That's what I thought of.
That's the coconut rum in there.
It's
Absolutely.
the coconut rum. I was a little surprised that this was the recipe for a Star Trek beverage, but it tracks.
What was the source of the recipe?
Liquor.com. So I figured
legit.
that they kind of know what they're doing. Yeah.
Now, in the show, was it alcohol or was it synthahol?
I believe it was synthahol because there's no actual alcohol in
What the fuck
space.
does that even mean?
I don't know.
They're just like, is it like near beer,
Yeah.
mocktails they're just drinking for to make it look like they're having a good adult time?
Well, it's sort of like when, they don't get paid a salary or do anything with money, and yet somehow they gamble, and they all
they're
are like,
credits.
no, this is too rich for my blood. Like, what the fuck
Yeah.
does that mean? Put all your chips in the middle of the table on every hand.
But without real alcohol, how is Riker getting laid so much?
That's a good point.
I mean, damn.
It's the
Just
beard man.
sheer charisma.
The beard.
Yeah.
He's a good-looking guy, but he always looks pissed.
Yeah.
I mean, ladies like a scowl.
wait.
Wuthering Heights.
I forgot to do it.
Oh, here we go.
Oh, sitting at... What are we
The
doing
Riker.
here?
We're on video right now.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
The Riker maneuver.
He does something with the leg going over the top as
Yeah,
he comes
that's-
in.
yeah,
Like,
too high
that's a
there.
pretty tall chair
He
right
comes,
there.
he comes at a different angle, swings the leg over
Yeah.
superfluously.
He does it
and-
so confidently.
Jonathan
too.
Frakes had them actually take the top of that chair down so he could make...
I'm sure he cut the legs off or some such. Right. So it seems like we're all ready to go talk about personal histories here. When Mike proposed some 90s sci-fi love, I was so happy that we mentioned Star Trek Next Generation because there's so much bound up in my early life, hanging out watching it with my dad. We did some of the originals with what's his name now?
Captain Kirk?
Captain Kirk. Yeah, thanks. I was actually trying to think of the actor's name, but it's been a long day.
The Shat.
The Shat.
The shit.
There's something on the cut. Yeah, we did some of that, but a lot of it was Next Generation. It was just the right time for me to be watching TV with, old enough to enjoy, understand a lot of the things, but not so old that I understood a lot of the things. But I got a lot of the social commentary. I understood a lot of the what makes a person. And I think it kind of planted some of the, maybe even the early cyberpunk love for me. Because, Data is one of my favorites. I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but is one of my favorites. And a lot of it is because it is what makes a person and him figuring out what to be a human. And I think also because I was late elementary, early middle school. And then I think it maybe ended right around the time I was in high school. So you're figuring out what does it mean to be a person? And I'm doing it alongside this robot on TV. So kind of, it worked. It worked for me. How about you guys?
Well, my earliest memory of Star Trek The Next Generation is when I was a really, really little kid. Now, this show went on the air in 87, was it? I think it was 1987 or 88, one of the two. So I would have been kindergarten, first grade maybe. I can remember being at my grandparents' house, being babysat. And I don't know if it just happened to be on the TV or if my grandfather put it on. I don't know if he was a Trek fan. Mm-hmm. Thumbs up. It was 87. Nice.
Yep. Ombudsman says yes.
So, but I can very vividly to this day remember in my head, I can remember this image. It was on some planet. and in like adverse like conditions. It was dark and stormy, and Geordie LaForge was in it. I just remember seeing the guy with the visor, and I was already at that point in my life a big Star Wars fan, so this immediately caught my attention. I don't think I really started watching it though till a couple years after it, after this memory. I was still pretty young, and I just was aware that it was a show. But once I picked it up in the early 90s, probably, I was like a fucking disciple of it for the rest of my life. And it's funny. It's come back in stages. Like I remember watching it right through till the show ended, like religiously. I can remember commercials for like the new episode coming out. I can remember it always being annoying because my father was a police officer who worked 4 to 12, and he would come home right in the middle of Star Trek: The Next Generation. And it was a big thing. You couldn't have the TV on during family dinner, and it was fucking devastating. I remember coming like in the early 90s the late 90s into the early 2000s, like they started showing a lot of reruns. And I remember, like you said, you watched it with your father. I remember my father now being home in the evenings, and we would watch it together then. A little bit in college, I watched it. It's been on and off Netflix once or twice over the years. And so it's become like a late night show of choice for me. If I'm up and I can't sleep, that's generally what I put on, or if I happen to see a marathon on, because they do those from time to time. But yeah, I always called myself a closet nerd in the 90s. I didn't show it outwardly. I was a hockey player, but behind the scenes, I was a diehard Star Wars fan, and a very, very, very close second was Star Trek: The Next Generation.
You are a man of mixed loyalties.
I still am. I'm all over the place. There's no consistency.
I've never watched the show.
No, yeah, this is brand new.
Still hasn't.
This was Sean's Ghostbusters.
No, I had a very similar take, I guess. My mom's father was really into the original Star Trek, and it would be reruns. We'd watch it, and I was over at his house, and it was like, oh, what the fuck is this? And I never really caught on to that, but my mom kind of became a Trek fan through her dad, and then when Next Generation came out, she was really into it. So I'd watch it with her, and kind of grew up with it, like the same thing, I guess. Like Adam was saying, I had that, learn a lot about the world and morality, and I think the best thing about Star Trek is it kind of creates a critical thinker from you, and it makes you kind of question things, which I thought was really cool about it. But honestly, the best stuff was like the space battles and the military side of things. I thought was really neat. I always loved the, just like they go to, some weird ass premise thing, and they gotta kind of use science to figure it out, or they gotta, use their bravado to figure it out sometimes, or they gotta use some other human side of them to solve the problem. And I thought that was kind of cool. But I don't know, it was just neat. Like LeVar Burton was on it, and I'm like, oh, it's the Reading Rainbow guy.
Yeah.
Or you talked about Data. He was a reoccurring star on, or a guest star on Night Court, the original Night Court, the good Night Court. And I remember going like, I know that guy, and then just kind of like putting that stuff together and like recognizing people who were sort of in different television media, and then they kind of coalesced around Star Trek. I thought was kind of cool.
So, what do you guys think about your rewatch? I know we try to pick best ofs, and Mike found a really solid list. Like, I remember watching each of these episodes as we went through them. Do you want to just start with what I mentioned at the beginning, just best of both worlds, and kind of move down the list that way?
Sure.
Or do you want to just kind of free flow it? Doesn't
I don't know. Do you want to? It's not necessarily a chronological thing, right? It's
no, they're not chronological. If we go that way,
it doesn't need to be.
All right. So, I have to tell you, I started with Deja Q. Because I remember...
I did the same, actually.
Really? I remember the character Q, and I was like, oh yeah, let's go back into that. But I forgot this was the episode where he becomes human.
Yeah.
Right. And is stripped of all of his powers. And there's that one reoccurring motif of the floating space cloud.
Oh, yes.
That's my one gripe about Star Trek Next Generation. There's always this floating space cloud.
I didn't remember the strange amount of nudity in Star Trek.
Especially with Q.
Yeah.
He's naked a lot.
Is it John LaFrance, right? I think.
It's like actually, I have it here.
I think it's John LaFrance.
LaVace, something like that. Hang on. One moment. Consults his notes. John Delancey.
Delancey, you're right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, so John Delancey, he's great as Q. I think he's like one of the best characters. I think I might have put him as one of my... Later on, we'll talk about it, but...
Yeah.
Q is like the Q episodes could be kind of hit or miss though. I mean, like sometimes they were like, oh sweet, Q's like doing some cool ass shit because he's omnipotent.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's like, dude, this guy's omnipotent. What a petty motherfucker. And it's like, you know, he's like Loki, right? Like that's pretty much what he is. But getting back to the whole nudity thing, I'm watching that. And my like 13-year-old daughter's watching this stuff with me, and there's just like, oh, this guy's floating there totally naked. And I'm like, all right.
Yep.
And then, like, later on, we're watching other episodes, and it's like, oh, they just strip Picard's clothes off, and now he's standing there butt-ass naked.
Yeah, that's
and,
the chain of command.
Yeah, it's like, there's a surprising amount of male nudity on this show, which I thought was just kind of like those things you don't notice when you're younger.
Yeah, I never thought about that before.
Yeah, maybe it's because, like, in the scheme, or, like, the whole arc of the story, they had spread out the nudity, but maybe we just picked the episodes where somebody gets
That's actually how I put this list
I was
together.
going to say, Mike Googled.
There's
like,
only-
I saw his Google search
There's only
history.
8 total episodes that involve any kind of nudity. Those are the ones on this list. No, all I did was I got like there's tons of these lists online. I got like 3 or 4 recent ones, and I cross-referenced these lists to see like, all right, to get it down to 10 or 15 where it's like, okay, these episodes appear on all of these. And then from that, I tried to get like a good spread so that we got the Borg on here, and we've got, obviously Q. I share Sean's take about Q being up and down, hit and miss. He comes into the show as this like omnipotent, like, he's a trickster, but he's also like menacing, and like and he goes out of the show that way too. It bookends it at the end of season 7. He's the same way. And then there's a couple of episodes where he's a little bit like that, like the one where he shows up and he gets pissed off and he flicks him out across the galaxy, and that's the first time they meet the Borg.
Right.
But then there's these other episodes with Q that are just fucking absurd. This is one of them, although I enjoy it for the entertainment value, but he's played for laughs. He's like, this is the comedic Bugs Bunny side of the trickster god here. And there's an even worse one where he like puts him into some medieval or Robin Hood type fantasy, and they have to act it out in order to like be released from it or something.
That's honestly, real quick little digression about some of the Star Trek tropes that are some of the worst things about this series. And I get it. I'm a Trek fan. I don't call myself a Trekkie. I'm not that devoted to it.
Trek adjacent.
Yeah, I'm a Trekker, Trekster. I don't know.
Not an aficionado, but an enthusiast.
Yes. And I have to say, I think that the creator, Gene Roddenberry, is kind of like the show's worst problem, too. And there's either that or it's the limit of the budget for a broadcast network television show back in the 80s and 90s. But so many of the premises revolve around the holodeck taking them to the 30s or whatever. Or they're doing this like, oh, we're in this other like fantasy realm. And it's like, it's the original series. They do the same shit. Oh, we're going to a planet where everyone's a gangster, and we're gonna reuse this Hollywood set and costumes because it's cheap,
right?
And that kind of stuff. I'm like, fuck, man. You go from these like big, epic, galactic stakes, like this race that wants to completely assimilate the entire universe and make them just like them, right? And then you go fucking Worf is wearing a Robin Hood hat, and it's like, come on.
Hardy har har. Let's put the dinky little hat on the dude with the biggest head.
Exactly.
And it's been so long since I've watched Star Trek episodes that I don't already know I like. So I had actually forgotten how many really awful episodes there are. But when you look for these best of lists, you also come across the worst of lists. And I looked at those and I was like, oh yeah, that was a fucking bad one. Oh yeah, that one sucked. Oh shit, I don't even remember that one.
Like, just to cut him a little bit of a break. With 7 seasons, you're going to get some tanks.
20
True.
Plus episodes a season.
And what's weird is a lot of it is front-loaded. A lot of the first 2 seasons are virtually unwatchable. And then it gets very consistent for a while after that. I mean, there's several seasons where almost every episode is at least decent and at best very, very good.
I hate to do it, but it's kind of when Roddenberry's not there anymore.
Yeah.
Is that season 3 then? Because from our list, there are 3 episodes from season 3.
Yeah, season 3 and 4, I think, are generally regarded as the strongest. I mean, don't quote me on that. That's not official, but I feel like just in conversation with people, that seems to be the ones that people like.
Gene Roddenberry died in 91. So I think right about
there
then
you go.
is when, the guy created it, he gave him a start.
Right, he's the George Lucas, and he created the idea, the world, he gave it the style and the texture and everything, but...
it always does best when he's not the primary creative force behind it.
Right, the quality of the writing and the character work, even the production, everything was less cheesy in the middle to late seasons, for sure.
Yeah, and some of that may have been in response to ratings. Let's throw
Right.
more money at the show. Maybe technology got a little bit better, that sort of thing. You
Yeah.
know, in terms of, because I mean, I forget how hard it must have been to make those special effects back in the day. Like today, we could do that on our iPhone.
Right.
It'd
Yeah.
be easy.
Right.
But back in the day, it took probably crews of dozens to put the glitter in the water and then,
Right.
you know, swirl it around for the transport, because that was famously how they teleported and that sort of thing. But I think one of my favorite episodes that we watched was Measure of a Man, which
Yeah.
almost like the exact opposite, had no special effects with the exception of Data's hand being pulled off, I
Yeah.
think.
Right.
That was it. So,
Those are some of the best episodes, too.
yeah.
Right.
I really think the ones where they dive into like the nature of what it means to be a person, you know, they kind of, let's see, that would have been season 2,
Season
episode
2.
9.
Yep.
So that's like 89. So it even kind of predates some of the like cyberpunk stuff where
Right.
they're thinking about robot overlords taking us over. What's that going to be like? And what's, you know, the singularity going to be like, man, when we reach that moment. But I found it really impressive how they were able to deal with Data being a sentient being, the actor who plays him puzzling through it and
Yeah.
being confused while on trial, and then Riker having those emotions of like, well, I have to prosecute him because if I don't prosecute him, he's going to lose de facto.
Right.
Right.
But I don't want to do a good job here, so like, how do I do this? I was really impressed with the acting.
Yeah.
And I think that's what kind of pulled me through that episode.
I agree, and I think that this episode is a perfect example of what recently when they rebooted the franchise, J.J. Abrams and all that shit. Like what they missed about Star Trek is that it was always essentially more about the ideas first, like the special effects, the cool space battles, all that stuff was part of it, and it was there. But it was never like the main feature. I don't think anyone ever came to Star Trek for the action. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no.
And episodes like Measure of a Man are where the Next Generation, I think, really started to find itself in its voice. That's a very interesting episode. There's a lot of little moments in it that really make you think. One of my favorites is when the guy who is trying to take Data apart and study him. Name? Anyone remember?
I don't remember the name.
Same here.
It's Bruce something or other.
He comes back later in like Picard.
In Picard, not
Yeah.
not the actor, but the character. Yeah. But at any rate, when he is trying to, compel everyone to go along with him, and he's not understanding why they're all resisting, he actually blurts out at one point. He says, "Damn it! If Data was a box on wheels, I would not be getting this kind of resistance."
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those moments where you're like, "Oh shit, he's supposed to be the bad guy in this episode," but that's a really good point.
Yeah.
How much is form and how much is function? Like, is Data considered a sentient being by the crew members because he looks human? It's recognizable and he's not foreign to them. If he was a box on wheels or a toaster, but he essentially had this, everything else is the same. He just didn't look human. What then? They make a comment too about the computers, or the Enterprise's computer.
I was just about to bring that up. Yeah, because they speak to her they speak to it as if it were a person, and the ship responds better than my phone responds. So
It's interesting that, where was I going with that? Fuck. There's just too much to talk about. It's all swirling around, but
it's going to be like 3 casts.
yeah, geez, it could be. The, Data is one of those characters who's just his arc goes across the entire series, going into the movies and beyond. Because it's like, you talk about the episodic nature, how every single week in, week out was pretty much its own self-contained story. This is before Breaking Bad, Game of Thrones, all those kinds of like the TV where they tell the long-form cinematic story. They would have like repercussions that would be revisited down the road, like the Borg and all that. And I think one of the most interesting threads throughout all of it was Data's search for trying to become more human and trying to reconcile that. And kind of linking back to the first one you brought up and how Q gives him a moment of laughter.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's his gift at the end.
Yeah, and then it's like that idea of, well, he's achieved some understanding of humanity, and then they go and they sort of, then they defend his right to exist as a sentient being.
Right.
It's, it's probably the most humanistic part of the entire series, because I know Picard recognizes that in the new series, and they went back to, that was the whole first season, right? Was about his relationship with Data.
Yeah, that was all there. He was showing up in his dreams and
just the nature of being alive.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't have a chance to revisit Picard or to visit Picard. That would be, not so much.
Well, if you're a big Trek fan, it's worth watching. I thought it started very promisingly, and I think it just fell off a cliff by the end. And
it gets absurd.
I've heard mixed things about season 2. I haven't watched it yet. I will watch it. And most of the original cast from The Next Generation will be back for season 3.
Wow.
Which I don't care how bad the writing is. I'll fucking watch it.
Yeah, I'm going to be there for it.
But are they going to
cool.
bring back Tom Riker?
Oh, from, what was that? The transporter accident,
Yes.
right?
Real quick, again, another digression. Fucking transporter. Okay.
Yeah.
So, all the times the transporter plays a role in whatever premise they're trying to go for. Like,
get him off the planet.
Yeah, so let's not even get into the whole thing. Like, you're basically killing the person and reconstructing a new version of them out of memory. That's a whole other existential. We could go on for several casts about that.
That's our spin-off cast. Philosophers of the Old Republic.
Yes. But the fucking, we gotta find a way to get Jonathan Frakes in this episode twice, because maybe he needs to make some kind of, extra money or something, whatever.
Contractually, he needs 45 minutes of airtime.
Right, we need an Evil Twin episode. So we're gonna have him be like a transporter buffer error, and we've got this copy of him that's existed in the transporter forever. What the fuck? And he just gets to live a life like normal? He's this new Riker who has a rank in Starfleet, and he gets trained? What is that? And then, the one with, when they brought back James Doohan there as Scotty. Right? And it's how do we get old Trek members from a couple hundred years ago in canon onto the series now? And I love that episode with the Dyson sphere, and that whole thing is super cool, and Jordan gets a moment. But it's he was stuck in the transporter for a long time.
Yeah.
That's just... What is that?
But dude, that episode
it's my nightmare.
That episode is frustrating as shit to me, because it's a fucking Dyson sphere. You know what I mean? And you're like, that's fucking awesome. Yes. Who built that? What is going on there?
Well, the ship's going into it,
right?
And it's whoa!
But then they just fucking leave it. They never answer it. You don't you don't know why it was built, who's doing anything with it, what it's doing.
The scientific, because they're just there as the advance, whatever, and then they're moving on. That's another thing I never discussed, right? They're in the Alpha Quadrant, correct?
Yeah.
Where the Federation is centered around Earth and Vulcan and all that, and that's sort of the core of the Federation. And they're exploring strange new worlds and new civilizations. The whole thing that they do.
Go where no man has ever.
No one has gone. That's the one correction TNG made, by the way. Anyway, and they're doing all of this, but it's they can get back to Earth super quick. What are they exploring? Wouldn't this stuff all be mapped? Wouldn't it all be
I mean, it's 2023 and we still don't know all of the ocean.
Yeah, but where's a Dyson sphere coming out of nowhere? We were just happen to be zipping by and this star system wide giant construction just happened to catch us because we heard a distress signal. You wouldn't have noticed this on a telescope or something.
It's essentially the floating space cloud, just in a physical thing.
You're right.
That's kind of one of the. I mean, it's an extension of the trope. Oh, do. Here we are on a road trip. Oh shit! Big thing in space.
Yeah.
And space is huge. They always talk about we're going into this nebula. Sorry, nebula's up close. You can't see the particles like that. It doesn't work that way. It's just.
It is funny how many times they get saved by the nebula.
Yes.
Although we'll say that one episode with that space face thing that shows up in the cloud, it's just lips and eyes. That thing gave me fucking nightmares.
Yeah, that was terrifying.
Oh, it was brutal.
Speaking of space clouds, we can go to yesterday's Enterprise, which essentially starts with a space cloud, ends with a space cloud.
That's a great episode.
I really enjoyed that one. I thought that the way they dealt with the paradox of time was, I don't know if it was maybe novel is the right word, but I appreciated it. Maybe that's why I like Back to the Future so much, but time paradoxes always get me. I'm an automatic yes for an episode like that.
That's a Trek trope too. There's got to be one or two per season of a time paradox.
Yeah, there's
another way to get Denise Crosby back on the show.
Right.
Well, yeah.
Well, there was that too. But there's a bunch of in one of the movies they go back in time to fight the Borg. Yeah. The Borg actually try to take over humanity by going back in time to when humanity can't resist them.
Yeah. What was that?
There's one where they end up in the 1800s or something, and they meet fucking Mark Twain of all people, and then they have Data's head gets left behind, it gets buried, and they end up re-digging it up later on.
It wasn't on the holodeck, was it?
No, that actually happened, and then. But to circle back to this one, this is notable for being Quentin Tarantino's favorite Star Trek episode.
Really?
He's talked about it numerous times in interviews. And there was some rumor for a while that he was going to do a Star Trek movie. And there was no indication that he was going to do this episode as his movie, but that's what all the chatter was. It's like, oh, he loves that episode. Is he going to turn that into a movie? You can imagine what a Tarantino Star Trek movie would look like. It would be fucking awesome.
Yeah.
Put those fuckers on the screen right now, motherfucker.
Yeah. And Patrick Stewart said he would want to be in that shit.
I would pay to see that in IMAX. Patrick Stewart, Quentin Tarantino.
Oh, yeah.
Put a phaser in that motherfucker's hand.
But yeah, it is a fantastic episode.
Does he look like a bitch?
Then why are you trying to fuck him like a bitch?
All right, I gotta take a time out here, guys.
Yeah.
Is this delicious, crispy, hot pocket
It's getting cold.
that Mike has supplied us is just staring me in the face. So here's some ASMR for you.
That sounded crispy. I will tell you, though, we did break with 90s canon and used an air fryer to make these too. We're going to use the crisper pocket and BPA the hell out of myself in a little bit.
I did not mercilessly burn my tongue, so
Hey.
did a good job.
We've also got combos and cheese balls. We got a full 90s spread for this evening for our 90s nerdgasm.
We are
Thank you,
so
Mike.
set. I really appreciate it.
No, this was easy compared to half the shit we do.
Yeah,
Walked into Tops and I
We
was
do
like,
some
what?
extra shit sometimes.
$3.99 later, Mike walked out with a full meal.
And you know what? That's why the 90s were great. Is
Yeah.
that why we had a surplus as a country? Because all the food was processed
Just
and it was
awful.
cheap as fuck.
So what have we not covered yet? We got
We've Best of Both Worlds
yeah.
and Chain of Command and Inner Light.
Okay, those are three of the best.
Well, yeah, I kind of did that on purpose.
Let's do Inner Light.
All right,
Okay.
go ahead.
So Inner Light is an episode that, as I was rewatching it, I was actually struck because I remember it as being one of the best and as a very interesting story and a great Patrick Stewart performance.
Right.
As I was watching it, I was struck on how like actually 3/4 of it is I don't want to say pedestrian, but it's not great. It wouldn't stand out to you. It's a fairly by the numbers episode. Like, okay, he's in this like simulation. It's not really a simulation, but it's like this thing that he's been trapped in, and he's living this entire life, and they're trying to figure out how to get him out of it. It's really the final 10 minutes that sell this whole thing. It's that moment when you see him as old Picard and he's got his grandchild and he's playing with them, and then he's bemoaning the fact that they won't live a full life because their world is dying. And they're like, oh, come on out and watch us launch this rocket or whatever. And he's like, what rocket? And then they're like, you've seen it before. And like his friend is there suddenly and he's young again. And then his wife is there and she's young again. And that's when Patrick Stewart like gets emotional. And that's when the episode suddenly gets really fucking heavy. And then he wakes up on the bridge and it is the most like reserved but powerful performance because Patrick Stewart doesn't actually outwardly emote. He lets his face and his eyes do all the talking, like the struggle as he's walking around in his quarters, trying to grapple with all of this, trying to like be the professional commanding Picard. But while he's choking back like everything that he's dealt with, when he plays that flute at the end of the episode, it is devastating.
Devastating.
That alone should have made him Sir Patrick Stewart.
Exactly.
To be honest.
Yeah.
That character had absorbed so much psychological trauma over the 7 seasons of this show to have lived a full life in 20 minutes, and then none of that counts.
Yeah.
None of those relationships, none of that, like everything that you had built up, all the pathos of that time is meaningless, basically.
Right.
You know.
So this was the only episode I did some research on because the ending is just so powerful. I was like, hey, I need to read more about this. And the guy who wrote the script, talked about how he wrote 2 scripts that became Star Trek episodes. Both were Picard focused, and both of them his goal was to bring out something of the Picard character that you normally don't get to see. So in this episode, it was Picard the family man, Picard not the captain of the Enterprise and all that. And then in the other one, I don't know if you guys remember the episode where he's the last one on the Enterprise. It's supposed to be getting like a refit or something. And then it turns out this crew that goes on is actually trying to like steal weapons or some shit.
Oh, yeah.
And Picard has to like fucking stay behind and like fight them all one by one. And like he's in the Jeffries tubes and all this shit. So he wrote that episode too, and he said he was trying to bring out like, oh, this is the warrior side of Picard and everything.
Yeah.
So I thought all that was cool. But he also, back to the point you were making before, he said he found it very jarring when they didn't bring back the inner light stuff at all in the show.
Yeah,
they said like they never showed Picard having to grapple with that again, and next week he was just walking around doing his job.
I was just reading an article about, I guess, one of the comic imprints does an ongoing Star Trek, and they're actually addressing that. Like Picard's character, he never was able to completely get over it, I guess. And they're talking about how that still plays a role in his thinking and his life, and that whole point. As I was watching, I was thinking, what would have made this episode so much better? And imagine if you can for a second. We don't get the prologue stuff at all. It's just Picard waking up on this planet after being sick and then launching into this whole thing. We don't get any of the crew, none of that. It's just Picard on this planet trying to figure out what the hell is going on and then aging into it and finally accepting it.
Yeah.
And then at the end, bam, then it hits him and he wakes up on the bridge, and then they give us like the...
That would have been cool.
That would have been so much more impactful, because I think some of the best Trek episodes are the ones where they just toss you into it with absolutely zero explanation. You hit the ground running, and then through the process of the story, you kind of figure it out. But I think it was a missed opportunity. It's still a great episode.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, unfortunately, that kind of speaks to the episodic nature of sitcoms isn't the right word, but, you know, running TV shows in the 90s was you would get maybe some ripples from different episodes that would affect later on, but it essentially was meant to be like one and done watch TV for most of it. Maybe that's why Star Trek Next Generation is so prescient, is that it didn't always do that, but it didn't always also carry on those things forward. It was like sort of breaking that expectation.
They referenced this in a great Futurama episode where this show that is broadcast from our time, modern times, when Fry is born, is being broadcast across space and not arriving till 1,000 years later, and these aliens are watching it. And then the show gets canceled. So they show up at Earth 1,000 years in the future to demand that they finish the show. And Fry's the only one who knows how to write this kind of fiction. And they bring up all these writing tropes of 90s sci-fi, like that one. At the end of every episode, the one rule is everything, no matter what shit went wrong, everything has to be perfectly back to normal.
Everything resets. Yep. When we get to the next cast, that's actually one of the things that one of my picks, that's actually what caused one of my picks to be off the air. Because the actors were real pissed about it. So there's a little teaser for next
It's a good
episode.
segue into the best of both worlds, too, if you want to hit that one next.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
let's get there, too, because we're running right about 41 minutes.
Oh,
So-
wow.
Oh, man, we got a lot
I know,
to do.
right? Like, we could easily do... We haven't even gotten to the Nerds of the Old Republic Awards.
The Trek Awards coming up.
Yep.
Well, I think best of both worlds is it is what saved Star Trek. I think everyone really knows that story about how they weren't sure it was coming back after that cliffhanger. And I think it was because of the cliffhanger that they decided to give it another go. And obviously it finished its run on its own terms, but...
Yeah. I mean, it had 3 more seasons after that.
Right. But that was I remember watching that, live when it first came out and being like, oh, fuck, no!
Yeah.
What? And just, everybody in my house, we were all watching it. And everyone just, everyone's looking at each other stunned, what? We have to wait, to find out, and we didn't know if we were going to find out, and it was, just that part where Riker's fire. And you're like, fuck! And it's they're going to kill Picard!
Which, by the way, is, the most disappointing comeback ever, because then it's you come back, and you've been waiting God knows how many months, and it's it didn't work. And he's like, oh, all right, let's figure something else out. Yeah. That's it. That's what you waited for months. But that moment leading up to that, when he says fire, when Picard first appears on screen, and he's like, I am the cutest of Borg.
I love
he
is a Borg.
Right. Yeah, he's all emotional. Yeah, and he couldn't bring him back.
He's not supposed to be
oh
emotional.
my god! But that was one of the great moments of the show when Picard first appeared as Locutus and said that. Man, this poor man and his trauma, the last episode, and now Locutus.
But that one keeps coming back. They
that
keep
does come
referencing
back.
that over and over again.
It does.
But just like Riker, him taking control, and just you're thinking they're going to set him up to be the next captain of the Enterprise because technically he is, and it's no, he's got to kill the dude because that's the only thing he can do at that point. because the Borg just is this unstoppable force of awesome.
Right.
Forget for a second that they're like really poorly costumed.
Right.
Like
Well,
even
yeah.
in the 90s, you're thinking about it
Yeah.
like, oh, it was menacing. But like you look
Yeah.
at it now, you're like, oh, there's a bunch of like leather daddies.
Right,
and it's
right,
like,
right.
I've got some worse shows to bring up in the next episode.
Stay tuned, kids.
Yeah.
But the Borg is what, and I know I'm not alone because honestly, they've become the reoccurring big bad of all of Star Trek now.
Right.
Yeah, and I think I really understand why, because if Star Trek's The Next Generation's draw is the pathos of humanity and, you know, going back to the other episodes we talked about, then the Borg are the antithesis of The Next Generation. They are the anti-humanity.
Right.
of
Exactly.
course.
Great point.
Well, and every race has like its own like thing that defines them. You know, the Ferengi are like disgusting merchants, and like the Klingons are warriors, and the Cardassians are
I had the same moment Sean just had when we went over Cardassian.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mike.
the Cardassians are sort of like warriors, but there's like this tragic backstory where they used to be peaceful, and the Romulans are like, it's all like espionage and spy shit.
Yeah.
And the Borg are like, of all of that shit, by far the most terrifying, because they're like this collective of hive minds, which I think resonates a lot more now in 2023 than it did back in the
absolutely.
90s, you know?
It's a super cool concept.
Right.
It's so fresh. It's so, no, I'm sure it's not totally original, but just the idea, the way they portrayed it is fantastic. It's like gray goo, but like personified.
Right.
You know, like this idea of this, like a singularity of just this ever expanding thing, civilization, whatever you want to call it, that will completely encompass everybody. And how do you stop them?
And for which your only use is like what you can contribute, like what is your unique likeness that you can contribute to their collective hive. And even their dialogue is fucking iconic. Like, you know, resistance is futile. Then everything that you say to them is irrelevant.
Yeah.
Like they're just, you know, they're like, justice is irrelevant. Like resistance is irrelevant.
Irrelevant.
Yeah.
You
It's
will be
fucking
assimilated.
great.
Number one.
Yeah.
He keeps doing that to him. That was the best part of it.
Yep.
Oh,
That
man.
shit is fantastic. They were a great antagonist.
But, being the guy I am, I got to point out a couple of things that I noticed as I was watching this again. So they can beam onto their ship at will, right? Like none of their electrostatic fields or anything matter. They can just beam right through that shit, and then they'll just ignore them. So why wouldn't you just beam all of your fucking proton torpedoes right into the center of the ship and then detonate them? Right? They had a chance
There's
to do
always
that.
a plot hole.
Yeah, but there's
There's
always like
always.
that, like, oh, we don't know what to do, we can't stop
Yeah.
them. Beam your fucking bombs in there, motherfucker. You know, it's like, what
No,
does it take?
we're gonna Independence Day this shit and have Data hack this guy, then send a virus in.
Data.
Sorry, Data.
That's what
Dr.
the random doctor, the one who was there for like one season.
It's because Gates McFadden was like unhappy with the showrunners or something, so they got this woman who was an old cast member from the original.
Oh, was she?
She was on like an episode or something.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, not a standard, but I remember when they switched and I was like, what the fuck is this?
They tried to write it into the story too, and then they brought Crusher back because there was always that sexual tension with Picard, which no, I'm here for the redheads,
Yeah.
not Adam, but you know.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's fine. It's always understood. Yeah.
So, last point I want to make about this episode, though, is it was one of the first times, too, where the show got really, really complex in terms of the writing. Not just the ideas, but the writing. Because there's a lot of shit happening there. Like, the Borg thing is, like, the main plot.
Yeah.
Then the Picard thing is the cutest. That's another plot. Then you've got, like, this whole thing about, like, who Riker's going to be, and is he going to take over another ship?
Commander Shelby too.
And she shows up, and she's like, "You're in my way, and I want your job." And so, like, that's a whole other plot
Very
right there.
dynamic,
Yeah, there was a lot of shit happening in that episode.
And the saucer section decouples from the other part.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
That's
the
always
battle
good.
bridge.
What?
That shit's
Battle
always
Bridge.
good.
It's happened like 3 times, I think, in the whole series.
Yeah.
And every time it does, you just your fucking jaw
Yeah.
drops. You're like, oh!
But that's one thing you're not supposed to think about is there's like hundreds, if not thousands, of people on that ship who are just
Families.
the families and shit,
chilling.
right?
Yeah.
And they constantly put themselves in danger of being destroyed completely,
Well, they talk
like
about
every episode.
They actually mentioned how the Galaxy class was a new idea, and they're like a paramilitary kind of, like they're
Right.
military, but
Yeah.
they're also explorers, and they thought it would be better for morale if they had their families with them.
Right.
So there's
Makes
kindergartens,
sense.
there's
yeah,
school,
there's always
all-
kids running
Yeah.
around.
Yeah,
And,
it's a
and,
huge
especially the
ship.
starts of episodes where there's credits rolling through and stuff like that. You'd see kids running
Right.
through the halls.
Well,
I
that's,
remember
it's
that.
one thing that I always, I never thought about it when I was a kid, but I realize now in retrospect, another thing I really liked about that show was just the general set. It's so different from any other sci-fi set. When they're on the bridge of the Enterprise, they don't look like they're on a spaceship. They look like they're in like a 90s living room. You know
I
what I'm
thought
saying?
that,
Like,
yeah. I think the armchairs and the carpet, especially,
and the bright lights, like
Yeah.
it's not like a dim like battle bridge.
But
you
the
know,
battle
it's-
bridge is always very like
right,
business.
it looks like the spaceship.
I love the control panels on everything too. Like
Yeah.
that to me was like, oh, they're all
Yeah.
touch screens
Right.
and all. Like that was always so cool.
and the swoopy nature of
Yes.
the buttons and everything, because they always started off fat and then kind of got like retro 60s thing at the end.
Yes.
Yeah.
If
So-
I know we're running out of time, but I guess
We are. I don't know what we're gonna want to do here. We're at 50.
just a real quick thing about Chain of Command is that there's a great 1984 reference. I don't know if you guys caught it when he's like, how many lights do you see? It's
Yeah.
like, how many fingers am I holding up,
Oh,
Winston?
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he's, there are 4 lights. And again, Picard, psychologically traumatized
Right.
and broken by this.
Tortured. Yep.
Yeah, by
Yeah.
this Cardassian, not Kardashian.
He tells
Yeah.
Troy at the end of that episode that he had, not only was he going to tell him 5 lights because he wanted the pain to go away, but that he had actually convinced himself that he did see 5 lights. You know,
Yeah, they actually broke him.
there's some serious trauma. I'll have more to say on that when we get to the Trek Awards, so I'll save anything else in that episode. But that was another just outstanding Patrick Stewart performance.
It's okay.
Oh,
I'll just cut a bunch of your comments out. And
That's
we'll
fine.
short it.
It's really all cannon fodder, so it's all good. It's all
We'll
good.
figure it out. Hey, if
Yeah.
it's a little longer, guys, it was a bonus episode.
Yeah,
Yeah,
dude,
there you go.
Jumbo sized, like
We
the old
could-
comics.
we're talking about the next generation here. It's all right.
There's a shit ton to talk about. I guess now, for editing notes, if we need it, here's a good place to.
Your life, as it has been, is over.